London, 1845. The morning edition of the London Gazette lay open on Baron Percival York's mahogany desk, the society pages displaying their usual parade of scandals and engagements. His father's words echoed in his mind, "A York without a proper wife is like a ship without a rudder." The late Baron had been correct about many things, particularly the importance of a suitable match for maintaining one's standing in society. Percival sighed, running his fingers over the embossed family crest on his letterhead. At 32, he had successfully managed the York estates for 5 years since his father's passing, increasing their value and settling old debts. But the matter of succession remained unresolved, and the whispers in London's drawing rooms grew louder with each passing season. "My lord?" His butler, Simmons, appeared at the study door. "Lady Harrington and her daughters have arrived." Percival straightened his already impeccable cravat. "Show them to the drawing room. I shall join them presently." Lady Harrington's eldest daughter, Miss Cecilia Harrington, possessed every quality a baron might desire: impeccable lineage, a substantial dowry, and the sort of refined beauty that drew admiring glances at every ball. She played the pianoforte beautifully, spoke French with a perfect accent, and never expressed an opinion that might cause discomfort. In short, she was utterly suitable and completely uninspiring. Nevertheless, Percival had nearly convinced himself of the match's practicality when fate intervened in the most unexpected manner. Hope Vickery hurried through the narrow streets of Clerkenwell, her worn boots splashing through puddles left by the morning's rain. The basket in her arms mewed pitifully, drawing curious glances from passers-by. "Hush now," she whispered to the 3 kittens nestled within. "We're nearly there." At 23, Hope had long since abandoned dreams of marriage and family. As the daughter of the late Dr. Edward Vickery, who had spent his modest fortune establishing a free clinic in one of London's poorest neighbourhoods, Hope had inherited both his compassion and his poverty. Now she taught at the charity school and lived in 2 small rooms above Mrs. Finch's bakery, trading lessons for the landlady's grandchildren in exchange for reduced rent. Hope turned onto the quieter street where Mrs. Wellesley, a kind-hearted widow, had promised to take one of the orphaned kittens. The other 2 remained unclaimed, despite Hope's inquiries throughout the neighborhood. Lost in thought about the remaining kitten's fate, Hope failed to notice the approaching carriage until it was nearly upon her. The horses, startled by a sudden clap of thunder, reared unexpectedly. Hope stumbled backward, her foot catching on the uneven cobblestones. The basket flew from her hands as she fell, spilling the kittens onto the rain-slick street directly in the carriage's path. "No," she cried, scrambling forward without thought for her own safety. Inside the carriage, Baron York felt the sudden lurch as his driver pulled sharply on the reins. "Whoa there," the driver shouted, struggling to control the frightened horses. Percival thrust his head out the window in time to witness a young woman dive into the street before his horses, scooping something from the ground. Instinctively, he threw open the carriage door and leapt out, reaching her just as the horses were brought under control. "Are you mad, woman?" he demanded, grasping her arm to pull her to safety. "You might have been killed." Hope clutched the trembling kittens to her chest, her face pale but determined. "I couldn't let them die," she replied, meeting his eyes without deference to his obvious station. For a moment, Percival could only stare. Her bonnet had come askew, revealing hair the color of autumn chestnuts. Her eyes, a clear grey-green, regarded him not with the coyness he was accustomed to from young ladies, but with a direct gaze that suggested she was measuring his character rather than his wealth. "Them," he finally managed, looking down at the tiny creatures in her arms. "Orphaned kittens," she explained, her voice steadying. "Their mother was killed 2 days ago. I've been trying to find them homes." A droplet of rain fell, then another. The storm that had briefly abated was returning with vigor. Percival glanced at his carriage, then back at the bedraggled young woman. "Allow me to offer you transportation to wherever you're going," he said, surprising himself with the suggestion. "It's the least I can do after nearly running you down." Hope hesitated, acutely aware of her mud-spattered skirts and the impropriety of accepting a ride from an unknown gentleman. Yet the rain was falling harder now, and the kittens were shivering. "That's most kind," she said finally. "I'm going to Mrs. Wellesley's house on Northampton Street." Percival helped her into the carriage, noticing the careful way she handled the kittens and the worn state of her gloves, good quality once, but mended several times. Not a servant, he thought, but certainly not wealthy. As the carriage moved forward, an awkward silence descended. Percival found himself uncharacteristically tongue-tied. The young woman seemed equally uncomfortable, focusing her attention on soothing the frightened kittens. "I'm Baron York," he offered finally. "Percival York." She looked up, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "The Baron of Thornfield. You've heard of me. My father occasionally treated patients from your estate before he died." She straightened slightly. "I'm Miss Hope Vickery, Dr. Vickery's daughter." Percival recalled the physician his father had sometimes consulted. "I was sorry to hear of his passing." "Thank you, my lord." Her expression softened slightly. "He thought highly of your family. Your father contributed to his clinic every Christmas." The carriage slowed as it approached Northampton Street. Hope gathered her basket, carefully placing the kittens inside. "This is where I leave you, Lord York. Thank you for your assistance." On impulse, Percival reached out to stroke one of the kittens, a tiny creature with unusual silver-grey fur. "What will become of the other two?" Hope sighed. "Mrs. Wellesley can only take one. I'll continue searching for homes, but it grows more difficult each day." Percival surprised himself again. "I could take one." Hope's eyebrows rose skeptically. "You, my lord? Surely Thornfield Manor has no shortage of mouses." "Indeed not," he admitted. "But this one seems exceptional." He indicated the silver kitten. A hint of a smile touched Hope's lips. "She is rather special. But are you certain your household would welcome such an addition?" "I am the Baron," he replied with more confidence than he felt. "My household welcomes what I choose to welcome." For the first time, Hope smiled fully, transforming her face from merely pleasant to genuinely lovely. "Then I shall entrust her to your care, Lord York." The carriage had stopped. Before Percival could respond, Hope had stepped down with the assistance of his footman, taking two of the kittens with her. "Wait," Percival called, following her out into the drizzling rain. "How will I know how to care for it properly?" Hope paused on the doorstep of Mrs. Wellesley's modest home. "I teach at St. Margaret's Charity School in Clerkenwell," she said after a moment's hesitation. "You might call there tomorrow if you have concerns about your new companion." With that, she disappeared into the house, leaving Percival standing in the rain with a tiny kitten mewing softly in his hands and an inexplicable sense that something significant had just occurred. "A kitten?" Lady Harrington's voice rose in disbelief. "You've adopted a stray kitten, Percival." They sat in Thornfield Manor's formal drawing room the following afternoon, where what was intended as a polite social call had turned into an interrogation after the silver kitten had escaped from Percival's study and interrupted their tea. "Not a stray precisely," Percival corrected, watching as his young nephew, visiting with Percival's sister, delightedly chased the kitten around the perimeter of the room. "She was orphaned." "How charitable," Lady Harrington replied with a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Though one would think such creatures belong in the stables." Cecilia Harrington nodded in agreement with her mother. "Indeed, the hair will ruin the furnishings." Percival found himself unexpectedly irritated by their disdain. "I find her presence rather refreshing," he said, remembering Hope Vickery's unaffected concern for the creatures in her care. "A house needs some life to it." "A house needs a proper mistress," Lady Harrington countered smoothly. "Which brings me to the reason for our visit. Lord and Lady Pembroke are hosting a ball next week. Cecilia would be honored if you would reserve the first dance." Percival glanced at Cecilia, who lowered her eyes modestly, then at the kitten, now contentedly curled in his nephew's lap. The boy's laughter as he played with the tiny creature was the most genuine sound Percival had heard in his home for months. "I should be delighted," he heard himself say, though his thoughts had already drifted to St. Margaret's Charity School and its unconventional teacher. Hope was supervising the youngest pupil's reading lesson when Mrs. Finch burst into the classroom, her round face flushed with excitement. "Miss Vickery! There's a fine gentleman asking for you. A baron, no less. The 12 little faces in the classroom turned toward Hope in unified astonishment. Hope felt her cheeks warm as she set down her book. Class, please continue reading the passage silently. Jane, you're in charge until I return. The oldest girl beamed at the responsibility as Hope smoothed her simple grey dress and followed Mrs. Finch to the school's modest entrance hall. There stood Baron York, looking magnificently out of place in his perfectly tailored coat and gleaming boots. Lord York, Hope greeted him with a curtsy that was more reflex than deference. This is unexpected. Percival removed his hat, suddenly aware of how ridiculous his presence must seem. Miss Vickery. I apologize for the intrusion, but I had some questions regarding the kitten's care. Mrs. Finch hovered nearby, clearly determined not to miss a word of this extraordinary encounter. Of course, Hope replied, maintaining her composure despite her landlady's obvious curiosity. Shall we speak in the schoolyard? It's more private. The small yard behind the school was empty, the older students having their lessons in arithmetic while the younger ones remained inside with their reading. A single oak tree provided shade against the afternoon sun. Is the kitten unwell? Hope asked once they were alone. Percival looked sheepish. The kitten is perfectly fine. In fact, she's made herself quite at home, particularly in places where she shouldn't be. Hope's lips twitched. They do have a talent for that. Indeed. Percival hesitated, then continued more honestly. I must confess, Miss Vickery, that the kitten was merely a pretext. I wanted to see you again. Hope's expression grew guarded. Why? The directness of her question caught him off guard. The women of his social circle would never be so forthright, preferring instead the circumlocutions and gentle hints prescribed by etiquette. You're unlike anyone I've encountered before, he admitted. Yesterday, you risked your life for 3 kittens without a second thought. Such selflessness is remarkable. Not remarkable, she corrected. Simply human. They depended on me. Nevertheless, it made an impression. Percival gestured toward the school building. As does your work here. Teaching the children of the poor cannot be easy. Nor is it particularly impressive to someone of your station, Hope replied with a hint of challenge. I do it because education changed my father's life, and he believed it could change others. I'm not mocking your choices, Miss Vickery. Quite the opposite. Percival found himself drawn to her lack of artifice. I admire them. Hope studied him for a moment, her grey-green eyes thoughtful. What is it you want from me, Lord York? The question was so direct, so utterly without coquetry, that Percival found himself answering with equal honesty. I'm not entirely certain. Your company, perhaps. A chance to know you better. To what end? Hope persisted. I'm not a suitable companion for a baron. I have neither fortune nor connections. I rescue kittens and teach poor children their letters. And I find that infinitely more interesting than discussing the weather and hunting with people who agree with everything I say because of my title. A reluctant smile curved Hope's lips. You must move in very dull circles, my lord, if my common life seems so fascinating. Perhaps I do, he acknowledged. Would you allow me to call on you properly? Or accompany me on a walk through the park? Hope's smile faded. That would be unwise. London thrives on gossip, and neither of us would benefit from becoming its subject. Then perhaps you might permit me to visit the school occasionally? To observe your teaching methods? I have some interest in educational reform. It was a transparent excuse, but Hope seemed to consider it seriously. The school can always use benefactors, she said finally. If you genuinely wish to understand our work, you would be welcome. But I warn you, Lord York, it is not glamorous. These children come from the poorest families in London. I understand, Percival assured her, though in truth, he had rarely ventured into such neighborhoods before yesterday. Shall we say tomorrow afternoon? Hope nodded, her expression still guarded but no longer openly suspicious. Tomorrow, then. As Percival walked back to his waiting carriage, he was aware of curious faces watching from windows and doorways. His driver looked particularly perplexed. "St. James Street, my lord," the man asked as Percival climbed in. Percival hesitated, then shook his head. "No. Take me to see my solicitor. I have some matters to discuss regarding charitable donations." The following weeks established a pattern that both delighted and confused Percival's household staff. 3 afternoons a week, the Baron visited St. Margaret's Charity School, returning with ink-stained fingers and a thoughtful expression. On other days, he attended his usual social obligations, including dinners with the Harringtons and dances at which he dutifully partnered Cecilia. But it was the school visits that increasingly occupied his thoughts. Hope Vickery, he discovered, possessed a natural authority that commanded respect without resorting to fear or intimidation. The children adored her, and she treated each one with a combination of high expectations and gentle encouragement that brought out their best efforts. "You have a remarkable gift," Percival told her one afternoon as they watched the children playing in the yard during their brief rest period. "They trust you implicitly." Hope smiled, watching a group of girls teaching a younger child how to skip rope. "Trust must be earned. These children have learned early that the world can be unkind. They don't give their confidence easily. Yet they've given it to you." "Because I've never betrayed it," she replied simply. "And because I expect them to succeed, not fail." Percival considered this. "My tutors always seemed to expect failure. Every success was met with the warning that pride comes before a fall." Hope glanced at him with unexpected sympathy. "That seems a cheerless way to learn." It was efficient, if not particularly inspiring. Percival hesitated, then asked, "How did your father educate you?" "You're clearly well read." "My father believed in educating the mind regardless of one's sex," Hope explained. "He taught me Latin and Greek alongside the more traditional female accomplishments. After my mother died when I was 12, I became his assistant. I learned more about medicine and human nature in his clinic than most people learn in a lifetime." "You must miss him very much." Hope nodded, a shadow crossing her face. "Every day. But I try to honor his memory by continuing his work in my own way." They were interrupted by a small boy tugging at Hope's skirt. "Miss Vickery. Billy says girls can't be doctors, but my mama told me about a lady doctor who helped her when I was born." Hope knelt to the child's level. "Your mama is quite right, Thomas. There are women who practice medicine, though they often face great opposition. But things are changing. If you study hard, perhaps someday you might work alongside women doctors." The boy considered this seriously, then nodded and ran back to his argument with the skeptical Billy. "You give them hope," Percival observed quietly. "I give them truth," Hope corrected. "And the belief that they need not be limited by the circumstances of their birth. Is that not what you yourself have discovered, my lord? That there is value in looking beyond one's expected circle?" The question held no artifice, yet Percival felt its significance. Over the past weeks, Hope had gradually relaxed her guard, allowing him glimpses of her quick wit and passionate convictions. He had come to treasure these moments of genuine connection, so unlike the carefully scripted interactions of his usual social encounters. "Indeed," he replied. "Though I fear my usual circle grows increasingly perplexed by my new interests." "Ah yes," Hope said with a mischievous glint in her eye. "How does Miss Harrington feel about your educational philanthropy?" Percival started. "How did you know about Miss Harrington? London may be large, but gossip travels quickly. Mrs. Finch's cousin is lady's maid to Lady Pembroke, who hosted a ball where you danced twice with Miss Harrington. The society pages declared it a notable indication of attachment." Percival grimaced. "You shouldn't believe everything you read in the society pages." "I don't," Hope assured him. "But neither am I naive about the world in which you live, Lord York. A baron must make a suitable match. It is the natural order of things." "The natural order," Percival echoed, finding the phrase suddenly distasteful. "And what of affection? Compatibility? Intellectual stimulation? Luxuries that the very privileged might consider after the practical matters are settled, Hope replied without bitterness. Or so I understand the aristocratic view to be. Before Percival could respond, the school bell rang, signaling the end of the rest period. Hope straightened, smoothing her skirts. Duty calls, my lord. The fifth forms are presenting their history projects today. You're welcome to observe, if educational methods truly interest you. There was a hint of challenge in her tone, as if she were testing whether his interest extended beyond their private conversations. Percival found he wanted very much to pass that test. I wouldn't miss it for the world, he said, offering his arm to escort her back inside. Percival, you cannot be serious. Lady Elizabeth York, Percival's older sister, stared at him across the breakfast table at Thornfield Manor. Funding a new building for a charity school in Clerkenwell? What has come over you? Percival calmly buttered his toast. Social responsibility, Lizzie. Father always emphasized the importance of noblesse oblige. Father meant hosting harvest festivals for the tenants and donating to the parish poor box, Elizabeth countered. Not personally involving yourself in the education of London's ragamuffins. And certainly not spending 3 afternoons a week in a neighborhood where you might be robbed, or worse. The children of St. Margaret's are hardly highwaymen, Percival replied mildly. Most are simply the sons and daughters of hard-working people who cannot afford better. Elizabeth set down her teacup with a clatter. It's that teacher, isn't it? Miss Vickery. Mrs. Simmons tells me you speak of her constantly. Percival silently cursed the housekeeper's observant nature. Miss Vickery is a dedicated educator with innovative methods. I admire her work. You admire more than her work, brother dear. Elizabeth's tone softened. Percy, I understand the appeal of someone different, someone outside our usual circles. But this infatuation cannot lead anywhere good. Infatuation? Percival repeated, an edge entering his voice. Is it so impossible to believe I might genuinely value her intelligence and principles? Of course not. But I also know my brother. Elizabeth reached across to touch his hand. You've been distant from Cecilia Harrington lately. People are beginning to notice. Percival withdrew his hand. I've fulfilled every social obligation. I've attended the dinners, escorted her at the theatre, danced the appropriate number of dances. Without enthusiasm, Elizabeth pointed out. Lady Harrington mentioned to the Duchess of Wentworth that you seemed distracted. The Duchess told Lady Pembroke, who mentioned it to me at cards yesterday. Percival set down his napkin in frustration. So the gossips have nothing better to discuss than my supposed lack of enthusiasm for Miss Harrington. For now, Elizabeth warned. But if they discover you're spending your afternoons with an unmarried teacher of questionable background, there is nothing questionable about Miss Vickery's background, Percival interrupted sharply. Her father was a respected physician who chose to serve the poor rather than profit from the rich. Her conduct is above reproach. Elizabeth studied him for a long moment. You're in love with her, she said finally, not a question but a realization. Percival opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Was he in love with Hope Vickery? The thought had been growing in his mind for weeks, but he had avoided examining it directly. I don't know, he admitted. I only know that when I'm with her, the world makes more sense. She sees things clearly, without pretense or ambition. She challenges me to be better than I am. Oh, Percy. Elizabeth sighed. What do you intend to do? I don't know that either, Percival confessed. Society would never accept her as Baroness York. No, Elizabeth agreed gently. It would not. And from what you've said of her character, she would not want to be accepted on false terms. Percival stood, unable to remain seated with the turmoil of his thoughts. I should never have sought her out after that first meeting. It was selfish. Perhaps, Elizabeth conceded. But it's done now. The question is what happens next. What indeed, Percival murmured, gazing out the window at the manicured gardens of Thornfield Manor, so different from the humble schoolyard where he had come to feel more at home than in his own drawing room. Hope Vickery was not naive. She had recognized the subtle shift in Percival York's attention weeks ago, the way his eyes sought hers during lessons, how he created reasons to extend their conversations after school hours, his genuine interest in her opinions on matters ranging from educational philosophy to literature. More dangerously, she had recognized the answering warmth in her own heart. The Baron was not merely handsome and wealthy, he possessed a questing mind and a fundamental decency that had surprised her. Unlike many of his class, he did not view the children of St. Margaret's as objects of pity or curiosities, but as young people with potential and dignity. It would be so easy to lose herself in impossible dreams. But Hope Vickery was nothing if not practical. "You're a fool," she told her reflection as she pinned up her hair one morning. A complete and utter fool. A knock at her door interrupted her self-admonishment. Mrs. Finch stood there, holding out a sealed letter. "Special delivery for you, miss." By messenger, no less. Hope accepted the envelope, noting the quality of the paper and the unfamiliar crest pressed into the wax seal. She waited until Mrs. Finch reluctantly departed before opening it. The letter was from Lady Elizabeth York, requesting Miss Vickery's presence at Thornfield Manor that afternoon for a matter of some importance. A carriage would be sent at 2 o'clock. Hope sat heavily on her bed, the letter trembling in her hand. This could mean only one thing: Percival's family had become aware of his frequent visits to St. Margaret's. Now his sister sought to end the association before scandal could erupt. "It's for the best," Hope whispered to the empty room. "Better to end it cleanly before more damage is done." At precisely 2 o'clock, a crested carriage arrived outside Mrs. Finch's bakery. Hope, dressed in her best grey dress with a white collar, severe but respectable, stepped inside with her head held high. The journey to Thornfield Manor took nearly an hour, passing from the crowded streets of central London to the more spacious environs of the city's western edge. The mansion itself was everything Hope had imagined: stately, imposing, and thoroughly intimidating. A butler led her through halls adorned with ancestral portraits and priceless furnishings to a sunny morning room where a woman in her mid-30s awaited. Lady Elizabeth York shared her brother's dark hair and keen eyes, but her expression was carefully neutral as she rose to greet her visitor. "Miss Vickery," she said, her voice coolly polite. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Hope curtsied, maintaining the decorum expected of her station. "Lady Elizabeth, you wish to speak with me? Please, sit down." Lady Elizabeth gestured to a chair opposite her own. "Would you care for tea?" "No, thank you," Hope replied, perching on the edge of the seat. "I prefer that we address directly whatever matter has prompted this invitation." A flicker of surprise crossed Lady Elizabeth's face, quickly masked. "Very well. I shall be equally direct. You have formed an attachment to my brother." It wasn't a question, but Hope answered nonetheless. "I value Lord York's interest in the school and his support of our educational efforts. Please don't insult my intelligence, Miss Vickery." Lady Elizabeth's tone remained measured. "My brother speaks of you constantly. He has funded a new building for your school. He has rejected invitations to hunts and parties to spend afternoons observing spelling lessons. This goes beyond philanthropic interest." Hope felt heat rising in her cheeks but kept her composure. "If you're concerned about impropriety, Lady Elizabeth, I assure you all our interactions have been completely proper, usually in the presence of an entire classroom of children and teachers." "I don't doubt your propriety," Lady Elizabeth replied. "But intentions and appearances are different matters. London thrives on gossip. Already, people wonder at Percival's frequent absences from his usual social circles." "I understand," Hope said quietly. "You wish me to discourage his visits to the school?" "Actually, no." Lady Elizabeth's answer was unexpected. "I wish to understand what you want from this relationship." Hope blinked in surprise. "Want?" "I want nothing from Lord York beyond what he has already generously given, his support for children who desperately need education." "And if he were to offer more?" Hope stiffened. "If you're suggesting that I have designs on your brother's position or fortune, I'm suggesting nothing of the sort," Lady Elizabeth interrupted. I'm asking what you would do if my brother were to offer his heart. The directness of the question left Hope momentarily speechless. When she recovered, her answer came from a place of painful honesty. I would refuse him, she said quietly. For his own sake as much as mine. Lady Elizabeth studied her intently. Explain. Hope met her gaze steadily. Your brother is Baron York. He has estates, tenants, responsibilities to his name and position. A match with someone like me, a penniless teacher with no connections, would cause a scandal that would damage his standing in society and possibly his ability to manage his affairs effectively. Many men have married beneath their station and weathered the gossip. Perhaps, Hope acknowledged. But I've spent my life working among those whom society disregards. I've seen how quickly charity becomes condescension, how easily initial fascination turns to regret. I would not risk Percival's happiness on the chance that he might be the exception. You call him Percival, Lady Elizabeth noted. Not Lord York. Hope flushed. A slip of the tongue. Or a slip of the heart. Lady Elizabeth's expression softened fractionally. You care for him. That is immaterial, Hope insisted. What matters is what's best for him, for the York family, and for the children of St. Margaret's who benefit from his patronage. And what of what's best for you, Miss Vickery? The question caught Hope off guard. I'm content with my life, she said after a moment. I have meaningful work, a roof over my head, and the knowledge that I'm continuing my father's legacy in some small way. But no companionship. No family of your own. Lady Elizabeth's observation held no judgment, merely curiosity. Hope smiled faintly. We cannot all have everything we might wish for, Lady Elizabeth. I learned that lesson young. A silence fell between them, broken only by the ticking of an ornate clock on the mantelpiece. Finally, Lady Elizabeth spoke again. You are not what I expected, Miss Vickery. What did you expect? Someone grasping. Or perhaps naively romantic. Someone who would cling to the possibility of becoming a baroness, however remote. Hope's smile turned wry. I may be many things, Lady Elizabeth, but I am neither grasping nor naive. Now, if our discussion is concluded, I should return to the school. We have examinations tomorrow that require preparation. Lady Elizabeth rose. Of course. The carriage will take you back. She hesitated, then added, my brother is currently at his club in London. He knows nothing of this meeting. Hope nodded, understanding the implicit request for discretion. It will remain between us. As the carriage carried her back to Clerkenwell, Hope gazed out at the passing streets, noting how the buildings grew shabbier, the roads narrower, as they approached her neighbourhood. This was her world, not the rarefied atmosphere of Thornfield Manor with its priceless paintings and generations of history. She had told Lady Elizabeth the truth, she would refuse Percival if he offered more than friendship. What she hadn't admitted was how much that refusal would cost her. Percival York stood before the mirror in his dressing room, adjusting his cravat for the third time. The Pembrokes' annual midsummer ball was the most significant social event of the season, and his attendance was not merely expected but required. Lady Harrington had made it clear that she anticipated an announcement regarding Percival and Cecilia before the summer's end. The thought filled him with a cold dread that no amount of rational argument could dispel. Cecilia Harrington was beautiful, accomplished, and impeccably bred. She would make a perfect baroness in every conventional sense. Yet the prospect of a lifetime with her polite smiles and careful conversation had become increasingly unbearable. Will there be anything else, my lord? His valet stepped back to assess his handiwork. No, thank you, Graves. Percival forced himself to stop fidgeting with the cravat. That will be all. Left alone, Percival crossed to the window, gazing out at the summer evening. Somewhere across London, Hope Vickery would be marking examination papers or preparing lessons for the following day. The thought of her, dedicated, principled, utterly herself, made the coming evening's charade seem all the more hollow. A soft mew drew his attention to the silver kitten, no longer tiny, but still small, curled on his bed. Against all protocol, Percival had insisted the creature be allowed in his personal chambers. The household had adapted, though Graves still sniffed disapprovingly when he found cat hair on the Baron's clothes. "At least you know who you are," Percival told the cat, scratching behind its ears. "No pretense, no expectations beyond your nature." The cat purred in apparent agreement, then promptly fell asleep. With a sigh, Percival squared his shoulders and prepared to face an evening of pretense. Downstairs, his sister awaited him, resplendent in a gown of deep blue silk. "You look troubled," Elizabeth observed as they settled into the carriage. "Do I?" Percival attempted a smile. "Perhaps I'm merely tired. The new building at St. Margaret's has required more attention than anticipated." Elizabeth studied him thoughtfully. "You haven't visited the school in nearly a week. Is something amiss?" "No," Percival lied. "Simply a matter of other obligations requiring my time." In truth, he had been avoiding the school, avoiding Hope, since his conversation with Elizabeth had forced him to confront the reality of his feelings. He loved Hope Vickery. And because he loved her, he could not in good conscience continue their association without declaring himself or withdrawing entirely. The latter seemed the only honorable course. Hope deserved better than to be the object of impossible affection from a man whose position made any match between them socially ruinous. "Percy," Elizabeth's voice broke into his thoughts. "You know I only want your happiness." "I know, Lizzie." He patted her hand. "And I appreciate your concern. But some matters a man must resolve for himself." The Pembroke mansion blazed with light, carriages lined up along the curved drive as London's elite arrived for the season's most anticipated event. Inside, the ballroom glittered with candles and jewels, the air heavy with perfume and the murmur of cultivated conversation. Cecilia Harrington, in a gown of pale pink that perfectly complemented her fair colouring, waited near the entrance with her mother. Her face brightened at the sight of Percival. "Lord York," she greeted him with a perfect curtsy. "How delightful to see you. Mamma feared you might not attend." "Miss Harrington." Percival bowed over her gloved hand. "I would not miss such an occasion." "Lady Harrington, you look exceptionally well this evening." Lady Harrington preened at the compliment. "Such gallantry, Percival. I've reserved you a place at our supper table, of course. And Cecilia has saved the first dance for you." "I'm honored," Percival replied automatically, while some part of him recoiled at the presumption underlying the arrangements. The orchestra struck up a waltz. Percival led Cecilia onto the floor, guiding her through the steps with practiced ease. She moved gracefully, her conversation pleasantly undemanding, observations about the decorations, compliments on the music, gentle inquiries about his health. "You seem distant tonight, Lord York," she ventured as the dance neared its end. "I hope you're not unwell." Percival forced himself to focus. "Not at all. Merely preoccupied with some business matters. Forgive me for being poor company." "There is nothing to forgive." Cecilia's smile was practiced perfection. "We all have our concerns." As the music concluded, Percival returned Cecilia to her mother's side, then excused himself to greet other acquaintances. The evening stretched before him, a parade of familiar faces and conversation so predictable he could anticipate them before they occurred. Lord Pembroke cornered him near the punch bowl. "York! Haven't seen you at the club lately. Heard you've been busy with some charitable enterprise in the East End." "Brave man, venturing into such neighbourhoods." "Clerkenwell," Percival corrected. "Hardly the East End. It's a school for children who would otherwise receive no education." "Commendable, commendable," Lord Pembroke declared with the hearty approval of someone who had never considered such an endeavour himself. "Though one wonders at the practical benefit. Most will end up in trades or service regardless, won't they?" "Education has value beyond vocational preparation," Percival found himself saying with unexpected heat. "It develops the mind, expands horizons, creates possibilities where none existed before." Lord Pembroke blinked at the passion in his tone. "Well, yes, I suppose so. Still, unusual interest for a gentleman of your position. Perhaps more gentlemen of my position should take such interests, Percival suggested, then immediately regretted the sharp edge to his words. Forgive me. The subject is close to my heart. Evidently. Lord Pembroke gave him an odd look before being called away by his wife. Percival retreated to a relatively quiet corner of the ballroom, nursing a glass of champagne and observing the whirl of society at play. The ladies in their elaborate gowns, the gentlemen in their impeccable evening clothes, all moving through the intricate dance of social convention that had governed his life since birth. He tried to imagine Hope in this setting, her direct gaze assessing the wasteful splendor, her practical mind calculating how many school books the cost of a single gown might purchase. The thought brought both a smile to his lips and an ache to his heart. You're thinking of her again. Elizabeth appeared at his elbow, having evidently slipped away from her own social obligations. It's written all over your face. Percival didn't bother to deny it. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who knows you well. Elizabeth sighed. Percy, you can't continue in this limbo. You must either declare yourself to Miss Vickery or fulfill your obligations to the Harringtons. This half-existence is making you miserable. And if I choose Miss Vickery? What then? Percival asked quietly. Society would shun her. The gossips would be merciless. I would be bringing her into a world designed to make her feel inferior at every turn. Perhaps. Elizabeth hesitated, then continued, but I met your Miss Vickery, Percy. Percival turned to her in shock. You what? I invited her to Thornfield last week. I wanted to understand what manner of woman had so captured my brother's heart. Lizzie, you had no right, I had every right, Elizabeth countered firmly. As your sister and as someone who cares deeply about your happiness. I expected to find a fortune hunter or a naive girl dazzled by your title. Instead, I found a woman of remarkable character who cares for you enough to refuse you if you offered for her. Percival stared at his sister in confusion. Refuse me? She said that. She said she would not risk your position in society or the scandal a match between you would cause. Elizabeth's expression softened. She loves you, Percy. Enough to put your welfare above her own happiness. The realization struck Percival with the force of physical blow. Hope loved him. And like him, she had been withdrawing to protect the other from pain. I've been a fool, he murmured. Yes, you have, Elizabeth agreed without hesitation. The question is whether you intend to remain one. Across the ballroom, Lady Harrington was gesturing for Percival to join them for the supper dance. Cecilia stood beside her, a picture of patient expectation. Excuse me, Lizzie, Percival said, straightening his shoulders. There's something I must do. Elizabeth followed his gaze to the Harringtons and nodded. Be kind, Percy. But be honest. Percival crossed the room with purposeful strides, his mind suddenly clear for the first time in weeks. The path before him would not be easy, but it would be true, to himself and to the woman he loved. Lady Harrington, Miss Harrington, he began as he reached them, I must speak with you on a matter of some importance. Hope Vickery stood in the nearly empty classroom, collecting the last of the examination papers. The summer term was drawing to a close, and with it, the regular rhythm of school days that had structured her life since her father's death. The new building, funded by Baron York's generous donation, was nearly complete. It would provide larger, area classrooms, a proper library, and even a small infirmary, luxuries the children of St. Margaret's had never known. Hope should have felt only satisfaction at this achievement, yet a persistent melancholy had shadowed her since her meeting with Lady Elizabeth. She had not seen Percival for nearly 2 weeks. His absence confirmed what she had already known. Their brief connection had been a momentary diversion from his real life, his real responsibilities. By now, he had likely offered for Cecilia Harrington, settling into the future that had always been intended for him. It's for the best, Hope whispered to herself, echoing the mantra she had repeated daily since that afternoon at Thornfield Manor. The classroom door opened, startling her from her thoughts. Hope turned, expecting to see Mrs. Finch with a reminder about supper. Instead, Percival York stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Lord York, Hope managed, her heart hammering against her ribs. This is unexpected. Percival stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Is it? I used to visit quite regularly, as I recall. Yes, but... Hope set down the papers, needing something to occupy her trembling hands. I assumed your interests had taken you elsewhere. They haven't, Percival said quietly. Though I've been occupied with some necessary arrangements. Hope nodded, maintaining her composure with effort. I understand. The new building is progressing well. The children are most excited about the library. Hope. Percival took a step closer. I didn't come to discuss the building. The use of her given name sent a shock through her system. My lord, I don't think, Percival, he corrected. After all we've shared, surely we can dispense with titles. Hope shook her head, desperately clinging to the formality that protected her heart. That would be improper. Improper, Percival repeated with a hint of frustration. A word used too often to maintain barriers that should never have existed. He moved closer still, until barely an arm's length separated them. My sister told me about your conversation. Hope felt the blood drain from her face. She had no right, she had every right, as someone who cares about my happiness. Percival's gaze was intent. She told me you would refuse me if I offered for you. Is that true? Hope's throat tightened. This was the moment she had both dreaded and secretly longed for. Yes, she forced herself to say. It would be the only sensible course. And when have matters of the heart ever been sensible? Percival countered. You would refuse me to protect me from scandal, from social censure. But did it occur to you that I might be willing to bear those consequences? You say that now, Hope replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But you have not considered the reality. The invitations that would stop coming. The whispers behind fans. The doors that would close to you, and worse, to your sister, to any children we might have. I have considered it, Percival insisted. More thoroughly than you might imagine. 2 nights ago, at the Pembrokes ball, I withdrew my attentions from Miss Harrington. Hope stared at him in shock. You did what? I spoke privately with her and her mother. I explained that while I hold Miss Harrington in the highest esteem, I cannot offer her the devotion she deserves. It was an uncomfortable conversation, but a necessary one. The gossips will be merciless, Hope murmured, trying to absorb the implications of what he was saying. Let them gossip. Percival took her hands in his touch sending warmth through her despite her resolve. Hope, I've spent my life following the path laid out for me, the proper education, the proper clubs, the proper social connections. I managed my estates as my father would have wanted. I fulfilled every obligation of my position. As you should, Hope insisted. Your position carries responsibilities, yes, responsibilities, Percival agreed. To my tenants, to my family name, to the legacy I will leave. But does that responsibility extend to denying myself happiness? To marrying without love when I have found it elsewhere? Hope's heart stuttered at the word with love, but she forced herself to remain practical. Percival, please. Think of what you're saying. What you would be sacrificing. I have thought of nothing else for weeks, he said with quiet intensity. I've imagined life with Cecilia Harrington, comfortable, predictable, utterly without passion or true partnership. And I've imagined life with you, a challenging, perhaps occasionally scandalous, but filled with purpose and genuine connection. He lifted one hand to gently touch her cheek. The choice isn't difficult, Hope. Not when I consider what truly matters. Hope closed her eyes, leaning involuntarily into his touch. You cannot know what you're offering, she whispered. Or what you're asking me to accept. Then tell me this, Percival said, his voice low. If there were no barriers of class or society, if we were simply a man and a woman who had found each other, would you accept me then? Hope opened her eyes, meeting his gaze directly. In that moment, all her careful defenses crumbled. Yes, she admitted. Without hesitation. Then that's all that matters. Percival drew her closer. The rest is just noise, expectations and traditions that change with time. 100 years ago, it would have been unthinkable for a baron to marry a merchant's daughter. 100 years from now, who knows what society will consider acceptable? Hope smiled despite herself. Are you suggesting we wait 100 years, my lord? I'm suggesting we stop waiting altogether. Percival's expression grew serious again. Hope Vickery, I love you. Your compassion, your principles, your unwavering dedication to what matters most. I want to build a life with you, or not the life society expects of Baron York, but the life we choose together. He released her hands only to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. I had this made for you. It isn't the York family betrothal ring, that can wait until you're ready, if ever. This is simply from me to you, with no obligations to history or tradition. Hope's hands trembled as she accepted the box. Inside lay a delicate silver ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny emeralds. It reminded me of your eyes, Percival explained softly. Clear and true, with that hint of green when you're particularly passionate about something. Hope felt tears welling in those same eyes. It's beautiful, she whispered. But Percival, I still don't see how. Let me worry about the how, he interrupted gently. All I need to know is whether you love me enough to try. The rest we'll figure out together. Hope looked up at the man before her, not Baron York with his estates and title, but Percival who had sat patiently through children's reading lessons, who had rescued a kitten because it seemed exceptional, who looked at her as if she were the answer to questions he'd been asking his entire life. Yes, she said finally, her voice gaining strength with the decision. Yes, I love you enough to try. Percival's face transformed with joy. He took the ring from its box and slipped it onto her finger, then drew her into his arms. That's all I need to hear, he murmured against her hair. As the setting sun cast golden light through the classroom windows, Hope allowed herself to believe in possibilities she had long denied. The path ahead would not be easy. Society would judge, gossip would swirl, adjustments would be required on both sides. But in this moment, with Percival's arms around her and his heart beating steadily against hers, Hope Vickery discovered a truth her practical nature had overlooked. Sometimes, the most sensible choice is to follow one's heart. Epilogue, 1 year later. The garden at Thornfield Manor bloomed with early summer roses, their scent filling the air as guests mingled on the immaculately kept lawn. It was not the largest gathering the estate had hosted, nor the most elaborate, but it was perhaps the most diverse. Aristocrats in fine clothes conversed with teachers from St. Margaret's School, local gentry shared refreshments with physicians who had worked alongside the late Dr. Vickery. Near the centre of it all stood Baroness Hope York, her grey-green eyes bright with happiness as she accepted congratulations on the first anniversary of her marriage. Her gown, though fashionable, was simpler than those of many of the aristocratic ladies present, a choice that reflected both her practical nature and her ongoing commitment to the school that still occupied much of her time. Lady York, a familiar voice called. Mrs. Finch approached, beaming with pride at her former tenant's elevation. The new dormitory building is a marvel. To think those poor children will have proper beds and hot meals year-round. Hope smiled warmly. The credit belongs to my husband. The St. Margaret's Home for Orphaned Children was his idea entirely. Nonsense, Percival countered, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of champagne. The concept was yours. I merely provided the funds and the property. He handed Hope a glass, his fingers lingering on hers in a gesture that still sent warmth through her after a year of marriage. The silver ring he had given her that day in the classroom now nestled alongside the York family betrothal ring, a compromise that symbolized their approach to navigating their unconventional union. The scandal their marriage had initially caused had gradually subsided, though certain doors remained firmly closed to them. Lady Harrington still cut them directly when their paths crossed in London. Some of Percival's former clubs had made it clear his membership would not be renewed. Yet for every loss, there had been unexpected gains. Elizabeth, after initial reservations, had become Hope's staunch ally and friend. Several progressive families within the aristocracy had made a point of including the new Baroness in their social circles. And Percival had discovered genuine fulfillment in applying his business acumen to expanding educational opportunities for London's poorest children. Baron and Baroness York. A small whirlwind in the form of an 8-year-old girl with dark braids came racing across the lawn. "Miss Thompson says the new books for the library have arrived. May we open them now?" Hope laughed, kneeling to the child's level despite the risk to her gown. "Patience, Lucy. The books will still be there tomorrow. Today is for celebrating." The girl, one of the first residents of the new orphanage, pouted briefly, then brightened. "Is it true you're going to have a baby? Billy says the Baroness is expecting and that's why there's a party." Hope felt her cheeks warm as Percival placed a protective hand on her shoulder. They had only recently shared the news with close family, but servants' gossip travelled faster than official announcements. "Yes, Lucy, it's true," Hope confirmed, seeing no reason to dissemble. "Though that isn't why we're having the party. It's to celebrate a year of marriage and the opening of the orphanage." Lucy considered this information with grave seriousness. "Will the baby be a baron too?" Percival chuckled. "Only if it's a boy, and only after I'm gone, which I hope won't be for a very long time." "Good," Lucy declared. "Because you tell the best stories, and Miss Thompson says you give the most money for books." With that practical assessment, she darted off to rejoin her friends, who were being supervised by teachers from the school. Hope rose, smoothing her skirts. "Well, at least we know where we stand in Lucy's estimation," she said with amusement. "Valued primarily as storytellers and book providers." "There are worse legacies," Percival observed, his expression softening as he regarded his wife. "Are you tired? Perhaps we should announce the news officially so you can retire early without causing speculation." Hope shook her head. "I'm perfectly well. Though I admit, I'm glad the morning sickness has passed." She glanced around at their guests, the unlikely mixture of worlds that had come together because two people had refused to be limited by society's expectations. "Besides, I'm enjoying myself too much to leave." As the afternoon sun bathed the garden in golden light, Percival drew Hope slightly apart from the nearest group of guests. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. "About the choices we've made?" Hope considered the question seriously, as was her nature. The past year had brought challenges, adjusting to the running of a large household, navigating the complexities of aristocratic society, finding a balance between her work at the school and her duties as Baroness York. Yet through it all, Percival had been her partner in every sense, valuing her opinions, supporting her causes, and loving her with a steadfastness that still amazed her. "Not one," she answered truthfully, reaching up to touch his face. "Though I still maintain that rescuing those kittens was the most sensible thing I've ever done." Percival laughed, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "On that point, we are in complete agreement." He glanced toward the house, where the silver cat, now fully grown and thoroughly spoiled, could be seen watching the proceedings from a windowsill. "Though I suspect our child will grow up surrounded by more rescued creatures if you have any say in the matter." "Compassion is a virtue worth cultivating," Hope replied with mock primness, her eyes dancing with humor. "Even in a future baron or baroness." "Especially then," Percival agreed, drawing her closer. "After all, look what happened when a baron fell in love with a woman who rescued kittens. The world became a little kinder, a little more just." As they rejoined their guests, Hope reflected that this, perhaps, was the true miracle of their union, not that she had risen from schoolteacher to baroness, but that together they had found a way to honor both their worlds. Percival had not abandoned his responsibilities as Baron York, but he had redefined them, expanding the concept of noblesse oblige beyond token charity to meaningful social engagement. And Hope, while maintaining her principles and her work with the children of St. Margaret's, had embraced her new position as a platform from which to effect greater change than she could have accomplished alone. It was not the life either of them had envisioned, yet somehow it had become exactly the life they were meant to live, together.